He was one of Jesus's closest disciples, yet he was the first to be executed. He went from a commercial fisherman to challenging the authority of a Roman-backed king. His life inside this growing movement lasted only a decade before it was cut short by a royal sword. Join me as we walk into the history of the Apostle James, the brother of John. The Apostle James grew up along the Sea of Galilee. His father, Zebedee, owned a commercial fishing operation. It was large enough that he actually had some hired hands on his staff. In this time, running a commercial fishing operation was relentless work. It was pulling up heavy soaked nets. It was starting your day well before the sun came up and working well past it setting down. At the time, taxes were a serious problem for the people. They had just astronomical taxes, and it was very hard for people to be able to live and pay off their taxes. Being a commercial fishing operation especially required a lot of taxes. Taxes to be paid to be allowed to fish, to be allowed to buy the salt. They taxed the salt that they were using to preserve the fish. So there was a lot that was really making it difficult for them to build this business. So James and his younger brother John worked together with his father and the hired hands on this business from a young age. And you have to remember, at this time, there was no GPS, there was no National Weather Service. They didn't have any of that, right? It was very dangerous to go out. They didn't know they would go out and people wouldn't return. So they had to understand how to protect their boats, how to protect their people and themselves. At the time, it was very common for businesses to be multi-generational. Every generation would learn, would improve, and then would pass down their knowledge to the next generation. And that generation would learn and improve, especially as technology got better, as boats got better and more better technologies and different things. So James and John were using all of this information from a young childhood all the way up to continue to improve their father's business. But they sat there thinking to themselves, here's my life. I'm going to take over my father's business. James, being the eldest brother, most likely was in line to take over the family business and to be responsible for his younger brother. Everything for the Apostle James changes the moment Jesus enters his life. Based upon the writings of the Gospels, we learn that James and his brother John and their father Zebedee were working on torn nets in their boat. So they're just fixing the torn nets when Jesus calls upon them, calls upon James and his brother John to come and follow him. Based upon the writings, they immediately get out of the boat and go and follow Jesus. Now for the Apostle James, there was definitely a part, right, where if he left, he could always come back. I mean, this was his father's business. Early on in James's time as a disciple, he unfortunately gets a reputation for being a very fiery type of guy. There's one story that's spoken of in the Gospels where Jesus goes to a Samaritan village and he asks them for like some food and water. And because of the cultural hatred, they were like, absolutely not, right? And saying we would never share with him being a Hebrew, an Israelite. And James immediately and his brother are like, do you want me to call God to like rain fire on them, kill them, like destroy their whole land? Right? Going from this kind of rage and anger, disrespect. And Jesus had to very nicely correct them, right? And be like, oh, guys, that's not what we're here for, right? We're here to not to preach vengeance and all this destruction. We're here to preach a new message. And he really had to correct them in their understanding because this was still early on in their journey. They didn't really understand the whole point. This culminated in the nickname Sons of Thunder for James and his brother because of this kind of fiery attitude that they had. James wasn't a quiet and meek disciple. No, he was one of the loudest pushers of objectives and things. When they went out to crowds, he was moving people out of the way for Jesus to get through. James believed, like most of the other apostles, that Jesus had come to overthrow the current people in power, to create his own glorious kingdom in Jerusalem. But unfortunately for James, he was wrong. Jesus had a completely different mission and purpose that James was soon to find out. James was very ambitious and eager to help Jesus and to push the group forward, to the point that his mother, allegedly, some gospel writers say his mother specifically goes to Jesus and asks for her sons to be on the right and left hand of Jesus. Another gospel writer also writes that it was actually James and John who goes to Jesus and asks. So we don't exactly know who asked, but either way, somebody asked Jesus for James and John to be at the right hand and left hand of Jesus, to be like his number 1 and 2. James wanted power, but he didn't understand the cost of that. He was not aware of the sacrifice he was going to have to make. So Jesus educates him and asks him, are you willing to drink the cup of sacrifice that he drinks, that he's going to drink? And of course, James is like, yes, I can do it, not really understanding what that meant. James transitions to a full disciple, leaving behind his ways as a fisherman. The Apostle James became one of the inner 3 for Jesus. He was there for the most amazing miracles that Jesus had performed. When the daughter of a man named Jairus had died, they literally were having the funeral songs and everybody was mourning her death. Jesus asked James, John, and Simon Peter to join him into the house with the dead child. He had everybody leave the house. Literally says, get out of the house. And they're like, why? She's dead. There's nothing you can do about it. Jesus gets everybody out. And James sees for the first time her being brought back to life. Literally, he had seen a dead girl brought back to life. This must have been an extremely powerful moment for James when he really understood who he was following. Jesus, up until this time, was still keeping his ministry more quiet. He was still telling people, hey, keep this to yourself. Don't tell other people about this. And that must have been something really strange to James, as he's like, seen this a miracle, this unbelievable thing. And he's like, wait, we can't tell the other disciples? Like, I'm not allowed to go? Like, we can't scream this from the rooftops of what just happened? He didn't understand yet what was to come and how everything has to work in the Lord's timing. Or how about the time that James goes up with Jesus to the top of the mountain and Jesus transforms in front of him, bright white, and Elijah and Moses are standing right next to him. Being in Jesus' inner circle wasn't always about miracles and mountaintop experiences. It was also extreme pain, sadness, and tragedy. At the end of Jesus' life, he takes the apostles to the Garden of Gethsemane, where he has them wait with him while he prays. And remember, at this time, James, John, the apostles, and Jesus, they didn't have necessarily a place to live. They didn't have like a nice bed where they were going to all the time. They stayed with people who would allow them to stay. They ate wherever they could get food, or people donated food. So he was probably hungry. He was probably tired and exhausted from what was going on. Up until this point, they already know that Jesus is being kind of wanted by the people in power. So they might have been a little fearful, right, for his life, for Jesus' life. But at this moment, Jesus is like, hey, I want you guys to watch me pray. Because he's trying to educate them. He's trying to teach them how to pray and what's going to come. But James, like the other disciples, just fall asleep. They just fall asleep. They're like, I'm tired. I'm just going to, fall asleep. And that really upsets Jesus. And he kind of wakes them up halfway through. And he's like, hey, I need you guys to be awake. Like, this is important. And yet they fall asleep again. When the Roman soldiers had come to take Jesus, the disciples were unable to do anything. This man that they had followed throughout this time had done so many miracles, had done so many amazing things before James's eyes, but yet he could stand there helpless as the Roman army took him away. James must have been fearful at the time that he would have been next, right? That, hey, if I continue to do this, that, they'll come after me next. They'll throw me in prison. When we hear of Jesus' capture, we only hear of Simon Peter, who specifically goes to where Jesus is being held. And he literally is asked, oh, aren't you one of his followers? Which he denies. The rest of the disciples, like James, we don't really hear where they have. So they might have gone home or went somewhere where they felt they were safe during this time. All of James' dreams of earthly power was destroyed as Jesus was led to the crucifixion. Imagine James now as he sees Jesus up there on the cross. He's seen some miraculous things happen before him, but all he could do was sit there and watch Jesus die. All this power and glory and kingdom he was expecting was no longer to be. He must have been very confused about what was going on. Like, once he had died and they had put Jesus in the tomb, what did he do? Did he just carry on? We know from the scriptures that they talk about how he just went back to the boats and they started fishing. Him, his brother, and Simon Peter and Andrew all go fishing. After the death of Jesus and post-resurrection, James must have been very confused and lost during that time period. He was one of the leaders of the group, but he didn't really understand what they should do. We learn through the book of Acts that really none of the apostles understood what to do until after Jesus' ascension, when angels come back and they're like, hey, haven't you guys been paying attention? You got to go out. You got to speak to people. You've got to spread the message, the good news of Jesus. At this time, the Christians were supporting one another. People were selling their homes, the items of value that they had, and donating all the money to the apostles. James became one of the main leaders, speaking to people all over, helping to build out the beginnings of the early church. It was important in the beginning that they built the processes to understand, what do we do with the money that we get? Where are the collections going to go, right? Who's going to get food? Who's going to get... They had to build almost like an organization, right? So that things got accomplished that needed to get accomplished. The Apostle James was a loud voice in the early Christian movement. This caused a lot of problems for him, and his name started to be well known in unpopular circles. The religious leaders did not like him for what he was saying. The Apostle James continued to speak out in the open in front of groups of thousands of people. He would go into the marketplaces, into anywhere he could, to preach the name of Jesus. While most of the disciples left Judea and spread out across the area, early historians believe that the Apostle James stayed in Judea. In Spanish tradition, there is this belief, though, that during this time, the Apostle James actually got a vision from the Virgin Mary, which wanted him to travel to Spain. So he did so and traveled to Spain to preach. But most historians agree that that did not take place and that most likely he just stayed in Judea. In 41 AD, the Roman emperor appoints King Agrippa to be over Judea. Agrippa was a typical politician king. He understood that to keep his power, to keep his authority, he needed to keep everybody in line. He understood if there was revolt, if there was dissensions, if there was an uprising, not only would he lose his kingdom, but he probably would be killed. This made the Apostle James a dangerous man. Causing a revolution amongst the Jews and disruption like Jesus had done was a serious problem for him. It is believed around 44 AD that King Agrippa targets the Apostle James. He believed that if he went after one of the most vocal people in the Christian movement and executed them, he would sow fear and terror into the other Christians that they would just stop what they're doing. Without a prolonged public trial, James was led to the sword to be executed in front of the people for his faith. The ancient historian Eusebius tells a story of the Apostle James that right before he dies, while he's in a cell waiting to be executed, the prison guard that was actually stationed over him to watch him, right before James is about to be executed, looks at James and sees what's going on. We don't know exactly if they've had conversations or exactly what exactly happened there. But what we do know is that prison guard confessed his faith to Christ. He understood in that moment, and he saw how James was acting and said, wow, this guy is willing to risk his life for it, for what he believes in. And at that moment, he asked the Apostle James for forgiveness. And the worst thing about that is that not only did he have to watch the Apostle James be beheaded in front of him, he himself was then forced to be beheaded because he submitted his life to Christ also. And the king could not afford to now have one of his people defect to that side. With the strike of that single blade, the Apostle James became the first disciple to be martyred. He once asked for a position of highest honor and didn't understand what that meant. From growing up on the Sea of Galilee as a fisherman to ending his life by drinking the cup of sacrifice that Jesus told him he would one day take. The fiery fisherman finishes his journey 14 years later after he steps off his father's boat. His death, though, did not do what King Agrippa wanted. The killing of the Apostle James did not end the movement. It actually inspired more Christians, more people to step up in faith. The Apostle James was the very first to prove that following Jesus wasn't about getting rich or becoming powerful, but about giving up everything you have for the one who saved you. He started out looking for a fancy throne and a seat of power, but when a sword came down, he proved that following Jesus was worth losing his life for. What do you think of the life and legacy of the Apostle James? Let me know in the comment section below. And as always, make sure you like, subscribe, share, do all the things for more walks into history.